In October of 1973, two drifters, Douglas Gretzler and Willie Steelman, they leave Denver with nothing but desperation and a stolen van. By the time they reach California and Arizona, they leave a trail of unspeakable violence. 17 lives completely destroyed, shot, strangled, or stabbed. One couple would be bound in their own home, a car used to escape, bodies hidden, an entire family slaughtered. This is a story of two monsters that took a road trip and turned it into a killing spree. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. As you can probably tell from the thumbnail, the title and the intro, today we are covering the case of Willie Steelman and Douglas Gretzler. Honest, their names make me want to be sick in my own mouth. Scum of the earth. But before we dive in, if you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper, and one day decided I'm going to hop on the internet, I'm going to yap about true crime, and now I find myself doing it twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday. So, if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on, because like I said, I'm here for you twice a week, every single week, and it's free. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they will all be listed down below in the description for you. Your case suggestions can be left in the comments or sent over to me via email. And please, before we get into the video, make sure you hype this one up. I beg all the time, I know I'm such a loser, but I really need your hype points. But I think I've said all I need to say, have I? Possibly, maybe, probably not, let's be honest. But without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the horrifying, disturbing case of Willie Steelman and Douglas Gretzler. So first up, we'll talk about David Edward Gretzler. Now, I must say, he didn't exactly come from chaos, but chaos definitely came for him. He was born on May the 21st of 1951, and he was born in the Bronx of New York. He was the second of four kids to what looked like this very polished, all-American family. I mean, this guy, he looked like the Walking Dead, but hey, who am I to judge? So his dad, Norton, he was the president of the Tuckahoe School District, and this probably sounds really fancy and really impressive, and you know, it probably would be to people who don't know what it is, but once you find out that he literally ran his home like a military academy, opinions change. Then there is his mum, Janet. Now, she was deemed to be the glue that held the family together, and believe me, this was a family that should have been in therapy decades before therapy was even a thing. Because So the family, they wind up moving to Tuckahoe, and neighbours, people in society, they look at the Gretzler family and they think, wow, that is a picture of respect. But let me tell you, behind those neat pleated curtains that you would see through the window was a world of hell. Because the father, Norton, he was the kind of dad that believed that discipline and abuse built character, which to me just translates, I'm about to ruin your childhood and I am going to get away with it. Norton was someone who expected constant perfect grades, perfect behaviour, but most importantly, he always expected perfect obedience. He wanted respect constantly, even though he didn't respect his own family. And if you missed the mark with Norton, if you didn't quite live up to his expectations, he would let you know, and he would leave a mark on you. He would hand out his own lessons to his children, and these lessons were actually just mental and physical torture and abuse. Did I say his name was David at the start? I feel like I did, and his name's Douglas. Oops. Anyway, so Douglas's older brother Mark, he was the favourite child. He was the golden boy. He was the one who couldn't do any wrong, even if he tried. He got straight A's, he was popular, loads of friends, he was good at sports. And then there was Douglas, who on average would get C's and D's, which, you know, not everyone's built the same way academically, but when you have a father like Norton, it's really not gonna fly. And this bit honestly like broke my heart for Douglas as a child, not the later monster he comes to be, because believe me, he is evil incarnate. But one time when he was younger, he came home with something he was so proud of. He had actually done well in school. He had got himself a really good report card, and for the first time, he was excited to bring this home. So young Douglas, he rushes in the door of the family home, doesn't even have time to shut it. He is just so proud, beaming with pride, wants to show off to his dad because all he wants is his father's approval. So he runs to his dad, shows him the report card. He's waiting there, anticipating approval, affection, something that he's longed for. Norton looks at the report card, shrugs, tosses it away and says, "You can do better." Because nothing says love like, destroying your kid's soul before dinner time. And it was after this that Douglas kind of gave up. He was like, well, what am I fighting for here? What am I actually wanting off this guy who doesn't care if I live or die? So he decides, I'm not going to try and impress this guy anymore. I'm just going to do my own thing. He represses his emotions and he does what any teenager is going to do. Rebel. He started to sneak out at night. He was indulging in alcohol, weed, music that he shouldn't have been listening to. Whatever. And I mean, bearing in mind, I'm calling him a teenager, right? But when he starts drinking and smoking weed, he's 11 years old. Yeah. So, age 11, and he is basically living in the family basement. I don't know if he wasn't allowed upstairs or whatever, but he was living down there, and he would constantly play the drums, and apparently this was to drown out any family drama. He was just sick of their shit, and he didn't want to listen to it anymore. So, Norton, the strict parent, the one who expects perfection from everyone apart from himself, he catches wind that young Douglas has been smoking the devil's lettuce, and he is not happy. And it's no great when parents hear that, okay, they're going to maybe freak out. But Norton didn't want to have this, we need to talk, we need to work this out, we're going to have to punish you. He just resorts to straight up physical violence because why not turn the home into a WWE wrestling ring on a Friday night?
Let's get ready to rumble!
So he and Douglas, they are wrestling. Quite literally, they come crashing into the bathroom, they smack down on the floor, injuries are flying everywhere. And from this moment forward, Norton would never ever miss the chance to tell his son what a failure he was, how disappointed he was. This family was so dysfunctional that at one point, they actually go to family counselling. But how do you go through family counselling when you're sitting with this guy Norton that believes that any feelings and emotions is weakness? So that went down like a fart in a spacesuit because Norton just couldn't do it. So then a real tragedy would take place in August of 1966. Mark, the golden child, the one that the parents loved and adored and was actually proud of, he would kill himself. Mark was only 17 years old and he had been caught stealing exam papers, which was apparently for a joke amongst his peers. But when this was discovered, he would be banned from all senior activities. And in his suicide note, he never said goodbye, he never told his family they loved him. He simply thanked his aunt for the gun. Could you imagine being that auntie and your nephew has killed himself using your own gun and then he thanks you for it in his note? That feeling of guilt and shame and responsibility that you would feel, I don't even know how she would overcome that. Now, as you can imagine, the death of Mark, this completely broke the family. I mean, the parents were beyond devastated. Norton had started heavily drinking. He was very abusive when he was drunk, not just physically, but emotionally abusive. And months after the death of Mark, Norton comes stumbling out of the basement, a bottle in hand, and he asked Douglas, "Why couldn't it have been you that died? Why couldn't Mark still be here? Why are you still here?" Could you imagine being 16 years old and you hear that from your own father, that he wishes that you were dead and that your sibling was still here instead? That is not emotional damage, that is full-blown origin story. So by the age of 16, Douglas is like, do you know what? I'm done pretending to care about people who don't even care about me. So he decides he is going to dive deeper into drugs. First weed, then LSD, then mescaline. Because apparently if your home life is already a bad trip, then you might as well as make it literal. Now, within school, Douglas would get called Lammy. I don't know why, and apparently no one really knows why he got called Lammy, but this seems like the kind of thing that would really irritate someone who was one tiny argument away from snapping. Douglas wasn't exactly popular, but he wasn't exactly a loner either. He had a very select group of friends who, was into the same stuff, the same drugs. He just continued playing sports, drumming, taking drugs, and just blending into the background as much as he could. People said later on when they heard about the crimes he committed, it was almost like wait, Lammy did that? Little Lammy Lamb from round the quiet guy with the drums? No. Apparently no one's seen it coming, but, I read this story and I can see it coming a mile off. So, after high school, Lammy, he doesn't even pretend to be interested in college. That is just not the route he wants to go down. So he sort of bounces around job to job. He has one as an auto mechanic, which, fair play, that's quite a good job. But the problem with him is that he had no follow through. And then comes women, because there's always going to be a woman in these stories. There's always going to be another victim before the victims, So at this point, he's in Florida and he meets a woman by the name of Judith Isle. Now, Judith was a woman from Manhattan, and apparently when she seen little Lammy Lou, she thought it was marriage material. Maybe she had beer goggles on. I'm not here to judge, but Judith, you could have done better, babe. So the couple, they would tie the knot in 1970 and they moved back to the Bronx in the hopes that they were going to start their happily ever after. Family, friends, barbecues, cookouts. It's going to be a great time. Spoiler alert. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because this happy marriage would last 24 hours max. See, Douglas Gretzler, he couldn't keep a job. He couldn't hold one down. And let's be honest, the guy wasn't interested in doing so. He didn't care about supporting his family. Judith was the one left to hold down the fort by herself, working a job at the bank. She is the one providing for them, providing for children, putting food on the table every single night. And when they had actually had their daughter Jessica, Douglas, he cares about Jessica for about 2 minutes. Then he gets bored of fatherhood, and actually he gets bored of the whole married life. It's not for him. And so with that, he starts disappearing for long stretches of time. I mean days, and then weeks, and then maybe the odd month here and there. Whilst Judith is at home handling the bills, the baby, the burnout that comes with all of that. And Douglas, he was handling petty crime. Nothing huge, but it was just enough to make his mark and make sure that police knew his name. So then Douglas turns 21, and a wealthy relative, they'll leave him behind a little trust fund. Now, it's nothing huge, but he does get a couple thousand, which, honestly, back then probably was a big amount, and for a family with nothing, that's definitely something. But instead of thinking, I better get nappies, I better get some clothing for the baby, maybe Judith deserves a day off. Maybe she should go shopping or at least get out to do the food shop. But no. He immediately blows the entire couple thousand on an MGB sports car. Not bills, not groceries, not baby clothes, a sports car. Just classic toxic husband behaviour. It's like, Judith, all your money has to go on the house, hun, but any money I make, it's all mine. All mine to do whatever I want with. So then we come to December the 26th of 1972. Judith is out with the baby for a bit. She's running some errands because, well, it's only her that actually does anything in the house. Now Douglas sneaks into their house, grabs a duffel bag, packs up his crap, hops into his nice shiny MGB sports car and takes off. No note, no letter, no goodbye, just left like some low-budget James Dean wannabe. So he starts heading west. He's chasing this dream of a life in Colorado. I don't know what he thought was waiting for him there because nothing was. So he stopped off in Casper, Wyoming, and he would spend 6 months there just drifting between job to job to job, but he would either leave the job after a week or he would be fired. And usually, more often than not, he was fired. He was then eventually arrested for vagrancy and a traffic violation, but again, Nothing major, nothing to write home about. So then, 8 weeks later, he decides he's going to drive to Denver, Colorado. A new city, a new start, and if his past is any indication of his future, a brand new mess just waiting to happen. And then we come to the other half of hell. Willie Luther Bill Steelman. Oh yes, because in this case it just wasn't enough to have one weirdo, we've got to have two. So he was born on March the 21st of 1945 in San Joaquin County of California. He was the baby of the family, and with that he was apparently the headache. His parents, Lester and Ethel, they had packed up all their bags during the Dust Bowl era, and they had left Oklahoma chasing this California dream. Now, unfortunately, they didn't find gold. In fact, they just found very long hours and a hell of a lot of farm work. Then Lester, he's able to land himself a foreman job. Now, it didn't pay much, but they worked together as a family. They worked hard to create somewhat of a living. They were the kind of family that every time life just off, they would work hard and pray harder and just hope that life would stop kicking them in the frickin' teeth. And because both of these parents, they're busy trying to keep the lights on and trying to keep food coming on that table, Willie Steelman, he was practically raised by his 14-year-old sister Frances. And I mean, listen, it's not much of an upbringing for anyone. A child raising another child. Now, by the time Willie had hit school age in Lodi, California, it was very clear he was the kind of guy that wasn't winning any popularity contests. I mean, he was by no means hated, but also no one was lining up to be his friend. He just seemed to exist. He was just there. Very much invisible, very much quiet, and just waiting for a plot twist. Now, a twist would arrive in his life, but it wasn't the kind of twist he was hoping for. At just the age of 13, Willie would lose his father, Lester. When his dad died, any structure he had just completely fell apart. School? Out the window. Good attitude? Out the window. Any humanity? Chucked right out the window. So he's dropped out of school, starts dabbling in petty crime, and he would just go on to become his mother's full-time nightmare. She would beg him to get a job or go back to school, just do something with yourself, do something worthwhile. Anytime she brought this up, he would just threaten her. Real charming guy. Now, eventually, Ethel was able to find love. She remarried, and Willie's new stepfather, I think he very quickly realised that Willie wasn't short for William or William Fur. It seemed to be short for walking red flag. And I didn't know Willie could be short for that, but apparently so. His mum still loved him from a distance, but she couldn't be the loving parent that she wanted to be because couldn't sit and condone his crappy actions. He was spiralling and she knew it. Now, the one thing that she did do, which is like, must we do that? She would compare Willie to his brother Gary, who, by the way, was doing just fine. He's moving on in his life, he's setting goals, he's accomplishing goals, and Willie's not doing damn much. And by doing this comparison to Gary, Willie just seemed to spiral further. So Willie's mum and stepdad, they are able to convince him that, you should join the Navy. I think it would be good for you. And, possibly the structure might help fix him a little bit. But shock horror, this would not last. He lasted a few months before getting the boot. There was no medals, no honour, no honourable discharges, just a boot up the ass with a sign that says, "Never return Willie." So then he decides that he's going to go and crash with his sister Frances in Denver, but this kind of lasted as long as a bad roommate from a Craigslist ad. Frances is living there with her children. She needs a safe space, and it got to a point where Willie's actions was constantly terrifying the children and honestly starting to terrify her. She had no other option but to kick him out. So Willie, he's like, no, where do I go? Like, no one wants me in their house, no. As if it wasn't the consequences of his own crappy actions. So where does he head now? Yep, that's right, he goes crawling back to California, wants to be back with his mum. Then we're in 1965, and Willie, he is really levelling up his criminal lifestyle. Now we've got 3 counts of forgery and involving a minor in a crime. Classy Willie. Real nice. So he would be handed off to the California Youth Authority and he was sent over to Pine Grove work camp for 7 months. The way you can think of this is almost like summer camp, but instead of marshmallows, you get manual labour and moral decay. So he gets out of this work camp and he thinks to himself, do you know what? I'm going to give this whole honest living thing a bash. Can't be that bad, right? So he gets a job, he's working as a field hand and starts off okay, like as okay as it can be with someone like him. But turns out he was just working there long enough for him to meet a woman. But instead of meeting a woman, he would meet a 15-year-old girl and then get married to her in Reno, because nothing says responsible adult like marrying a frickin' child. And not only that, but then moving this child into your mother's house with you. And can you believe it? It all fell apart. I know, I was shocked too, thought it was a match made in heaven. See, this all started to fall apart because of his crime, you know, the petty theft, the forgery, the escalation into even worse crimes. But he was also becoming very abusive. By December, he would be wanted for cashing stolen checks. He was then arrested in January and thrown into jail, and whilst he was in custody, he tries to kill himself. And when he does this, he's kind of thinking, you know, why is my bride not coming to see me? Like, what's going on there? But it turns out his underage bride's parents, they had immediately went to the court and got this marriage annulled. Thank you, God, we've got people with common sense. And then we move on to the carousel of institutions that Willie Steelman would end up in. So first, we've got Stockton State Hospital. Whilst he was here, this is where doctors would label him mentally ill. I mean, I think that's why he's at the hospital, but I think we're trying to find out, you know, what the mental illness might be. And then Willie finds himself in a Atascadero hospital. We all know that. Honestly, the minute I hear a Atascadero, the person who immediately comes to my mind, 3, 2, 1, we'll say it at the same time. 3, 2, 1, Edmund Kemper. See, I knew we were both in sync. But this was a place for people who made regular mental health hospitals say, you know, that's above our pay grade. We don't get paid enough to deal with that. Now, apparently, Willie, whilst he was there, he made remarkable progress. I'd love to see it. But once they decide that he is making this remarkable progress, he's then sent back to Stockton State Hospital. Once they feel like he is rehabilitated enough, he would then be sent to prison for 14 months for the forgery crime. He would end up in California Men's Colony, where, shockingly, he wound up being a role model prisoner. Aren't they all? Now, he would only have to serve 2 months before being paroled in 1968. He then moved back to Lodi of California. He got a job working as a store clerk, and, you know, you think things are turning around. You think he's maybe working on himself. No, I mean, he's telling everyone that he's turning his life around, but you know, these people have a tendency to lie. Because just 3 months later, he would be arrested for selling LSD to 2 16-year-old girls. It's like this man, he just cannot resist making life's worst decisions. So 43 days in jail and a $625 fine later, he would be back walking the streets. And then he would meet a woman by the name of Kathy Stone. Now, they had actually originally met when he was still locked up, and in the minute he gets out of prison, they officially meet. And I'm saying officially meet, but actually the minute he gets out of prison, he moves right on in with Kathy. Now, through her, he would meet another woman, and this was a woman called Denise Mitchell, because apparently this man collects wives like he collects parking tickets. By June of 1969, he is married to her, and then he starts moving around California like he is allergic to stability. So he finds himself landing in Sacramento, Mountain View, new cities, new chaos. Now, by 1970 and 1971, Willie, he's basically on first name basis with law enforcement. Like, he was just known to be such a freaking nuisance. But I don't know if, like, because he was on first name basis with law enforcement, if officers kind of felt bad for him, because he was constantly being arrested, but constantly catching a break. Charges were being dropped, fines were being reduced. It was like the universe was just given so many second chances to a specimen that didn't deserve them. Now, we get to 1972, and his luck and his self-control both running on empty. His drug use had escalated to the extremes, but somehow he was still able to get himself a job as an orderly at Vista Ray Hospital. He was making around $320 a month, which he had never made in his life. I mean, this is a guy who's allergic to work. But this could have been a really positive thing for him until he was fired because he was caught forging prescriptions because, well, of course he was. So then we come to New Year's Day of 1973 and Denise, she's just like, new year, new me, new man, possibly. She packs her bags and leaves. She's had enough of this man. She told him that she was done covering for him, she was done being broke, and she was done watching her paychecks go straight into this man's veins. Now, it might have been the end of their marriage, but this was just the beginning of Willie's final downward spiral. Because this man, he's officially lost everything. Everything except his appetite for destruction. So come August of 1973, Willie Steelman, he is doing his usual boomerang act, like bouncing from family member to family member, seeing who will accept him back. So he travels over to Colorado, and all of this is done under the guise of going to see his sister Frances. So he knocks the door, Frances opens, and although she's met with uncertainty, at the same time, that's her brother. She wants to welcome him in. She's a good human being, unlike him. So she welcomes him into her home. She is willing to give him another chance, and this is just going to go down like a lead balloon. Now, Frances welcomes him into the home, but for a visit. He's not allowed to stay. Things, she can't risk her children like that again. But there comes a problem because Willie, when it's time to go, he doesn't. He remains seated and firm on his decision, and he flat out tells Frances, I'm not leaving. Like, I'm living here now. Like it or lump it, Franny. And he literally sets up camp in the corner of an unfurnished room, and I don't know if he's trying to claim squatters' rights or something, because he just does not move. He doesn't pay rent, he refuses to work, and he basically turns her home into his own personal frickin' Airbnb. Only that this Airbnb had 0 checkout date. Now, Frances hated this. She was seething. I mean, she was absolutely fuming. She doesn't want a man like this in her house. But Willie's oldest niece, Terry Morgan, she was obsessed with her Uncle Willie. She thought he was so cool. Like, he had all these crime stories, he had lived a life. And she was young and impressionable. She just thinks that Uncle Willie is a total riot. But I mean, kids don't really have any taste, do they? Now, via Terry, Steelman would be introduced to another young girl, and this was 17-year-old Marcia Renslow. And she, like Terry, would be one of the many youngsters who became obsessed with Willie and his stories about crime. And now the moment that you've probably all been waiting for: how did Willie Steelman and Douglas Gretzler come to be? Well, what had happened is Gretzler had met Steelman at his sister's home, Frances's home. The two of them had become acquaintances through Marcia Renslow, who had asked both of them to kind of join forces and steal motorcycle parts for her. So Marcia, I mean, you're not off on a good foot either. Now, this was taking place on a late evening in September, and as you can imagine, the two of them just hit it off right away. They just clicked in an instant. I mean, they were inseparable from that moment, and although this would be a great thing in a charming story about two best friends becoming best friends, this is two monsters joining forces. Now, Douglas Gretzler, he would position himself in his telling of this story as the follower, the Robin to Steelman's very questionable Batman. And the two of them, they were the best match in the worst frickin' way, because their idea of fun was scheming and planning about how to make fast cash, but the fun way. And of course the fun way is the illegal way. So Steelman, he starts teaching Gretzler how to snatch purses, how to scoop checkbooks. Soon enough, the pair of them, they would graduate in beating a young teenage boy and then stealing his shotgun. And whilst they're doing this, they're brainstorming how they can commit bigger crimes, the biggest crimes, and get away with them. Now, Frances, she couldn't take this anymore. I mean, Gretzler's here now with Steelman. They've got Marcia Renslow coming in, just egging them on. She decides to bail on her own home. Now, that's September the 30th, and from here on, chaos just ensues. And you might wonder, what was the straw that broke the camel's back for Frances? What drove her out her own frickin' home? Well, Steelman and Gretzler, they were practicing their purse snatching, and they just so happened to snatch Frances's purse. And even when she noticed, wouldn't give her it back. So Frances, she takes her children and she would move into an apartment nearby, and she told Steelman, you need to get out of here because I'm having this whole place repossessed. Did he move? No. So not too long after this, Steelman drops a bomb on the group. He tells them, we're going to Arizona. And when they ask, why? Why do we need to go to Arizona? We've got a whole apartment here. This is amazing. Willie tells them, I need to go on a weed run, but I also want some sunshine. So along for this journey to Arizona, we've got Steelman, we've got Gretzler, and then we've got Marcia Renslow. She's coming along for the ride. By October the 13th, the trio of Trouble, they hit Globe, Arizona, and they decide, we need to start off our vacation in the best way possible. And for them, this was armed robbery. So the three of them, they come across this young couple who were sunbathing in the nude, and they threaten this couple and they demand any money that they've got, and from this whole escapade they would make $5. Hope it was worth it. That very night, they then decide they're going to pick up a hitchhiker in Tempe. They drove him out to the very secluded Orange Grove, pistol whipped him, took his ring, then took the ring to a pawn shop, pawned it, and got $60. It's very much like high stakes, low reward, but hey, I guess crime's just a numbers game. So the three of them, they decide to spend the night at the Stone Motel, and at this point they're just plotting their next move. Where are they going to go next? Who are they going to track down? And they decide they're going to track down a young man by the name of Kenneth Unrein. Now Kenneth, he was in Phoenix of Arizona, and apparently he was connected to someone called Kathleen Mestites, who Marcia, she was very eager to see, and apparently she was a bit infatuated with her. So it's October the 14th and the trio, they arrive at Kenneth Unrein's address, only to learn that he and Kathleen had split up. So at Marcia's request, Unrein, he provides the trio with Kathleen's new address and informs them that she has moved in with a young man who is 19 years old. And this was Robert Robbins. And of course, as expected, Unrein gives them the wrong address. 2 days later, broke and furious Steelman, he returns to Unrein's house, and when he returns, he would find another young man there by the name of Michael Adshade. And Willie Steelman, of course, wanting to lay down the law and peacock his authority, he holds Michael and Kenneth at gunpoint and then forces them into the car and forces them to drive to Kathleen's apartment. Now, once they're there, the furiousness, it kinda dissipates because now they're having a cocktail of drugs and alcohol. Now, Unrein and Adshade, they slip out for a second. Maybe they're going to get some air. I'm not entirely sure. Kathleen Mestites, she confides in the trio that Unrein had brutally beaten her, and apparently this assault had only taken place 2 months prior. Robert Robbins, he then escorts Steelman and Gretzler back to their motel, leaving just Kathleen and Marcia. Now, by October the 22nd, 6 days have gone by. Not a peep from Gretzler, not a peep from Steelman. Where the hell did they go? Kathleen at this point, she's like, no, do you know what? I've actually had enough. She decides to buy Marcia a plane ticket back to Denver, which I'm sure Marcia would be very grateful for when she finds out what's going to go down. So then we come to October the 17th of 1973. Gretzler and Steelman, they return to Unrein's apartment. Whilst there, they force Unrein and Adshade into Unrein's Volkswagen van at gunpoint. Once they're in this van, they get driven straight to California. Now, these men, they wouldn't be bound at this point, but Douglas and Willie, they were just pointing a gun at them, staring at them the whole time. They were even switching out seats so they could take turns pointing the gun. By the morning, they all arrive in Oakdale, and Steelman, he goes into a convenience store and buys them all a drink, because why not hydrate before you plan to commit murder? So they're driving again, and then hours later, they would pull over at Little John Creek. Now, once they get there, they would order Adshade and Unrein to walk down the creek bed. But at this point, they're bound with microphone cord and rope. They can barely walk at this point, and they're being forced down this creek bed. Now, one of the men, they would turn around to Steelman and Gretzler, and they point blank ask, what's going to happen here, man? What are you going to do? Now, at first, The young men, they're made to believe that they're just going to be abandoned here and that they should wait around an hour before they try and free themselves. So Steelman and Gretzler, they walk off, right? They're really playing the role here. 2 minutes later, they come back, and they come back with a literal death sentence. Because within minutes, Unrein, he was partially strangled and brutally stabbed to death. Adshade, he would suffer the exact same fate. Both of them were then stripped naked and they were hidden under bushes so no one could find them. And what is a horror film to these young men who have lost their lives? This is just another Tuesday to Steelman and Gretzler. So they've just committed murder and they literally could not care. In fact, they just want to do it again. So the following morning, they hit the road. Now, by October the 20th, Unrein's van, the Volkswagen van that they stole, this would break down near California State Route 1. Now, Steelman and Gretzler, they of course just look like two people who have unfortunately broken down on the road. No one's going to know that they're bloodthirsty and cash hungry, and they're able to pull over a young couple in Petaluma. The second this young couple are pulled over, they're held at gunpoint and knife point. They're ordered to drive to Santa Clara. James Fulkerson, the male victim in this part of the case, he would then be bound and a gun would be held to his head. He's panicking. He's trying to reason with these men. He is begging them to at least spare his girlfriend, and he actually says to them, I know I don't have much say in this, but please don't hurt Eileen, okay? Please don't hurt her. And I'm not exactly sure what part of that statement had freaked Steelman out so much, but it was at this point, it was like a switch went off. The crazy switch. He just goes manic and he pulls this young man up to his feet, looks him dead in the eye, and he tells him, I have every intention of blowing both your heads off. Could you just imagine the fear and the terror that you would feel in that moment? Now, around an hour later, Fulkerson, he would be put in the trunk of the vehicle, and Eileen was left with both these men. Now, Steelman, the monster that he is, he attempts to rape Eileen, but thankfully, this weirdo could not sustain an erection. And then he decides, actually, you know what? I'm going to let you live with the trauma that I've caused you, so we're just going to rob you and then leave you. And that's exactly what they did. They left this young couple in Mountain View after they were able to steal a car. Now, it's at this point where they're getting a bit worried about loose ends, specifically Kathleen and Robert Robbins, and, you know, also the two teenagers that they had released. So they decide they're going to head back through to Phoenix, and on the way they would pick up another hitchhiker. This would be 18-year-old Stephen Allen Loughran. When this young boy's picked up, he is so happy, so grateful for the lift, and he's happy to chip in money for gas. He's very forthcoming, and he just had no idea what was coming his way. So they all travel back to Kathleen Mestite's. This includes Loughran. He's went with them. They all have a night where they indulge in alcohol, they're all taking drugs, they're having a party. It seems like a great time. But come the morning, October the 23rd, Steelman's patience is running very, very, very thin. Kathleen keeps talking about white magic and reincarnation, and this is just grating on his skull. And then Loughran, he's been talking about sports, and he's just no interested. But instead of telling them to shut up, he has a bigger plan in hand. So later that afternoon, Robert Robbins, he would drive Kathleen Mestites to work. And this gave Steelman the opportunity to pick a fight with Loughran over nothing. Nothing happened, nothing took place for him to be so furious. However, Loughran was able to handle himself. He was very much able to overpower Steelman in this struggle, but this is when Steelman would snap. He reaches for a shotgun, he grabs a sleeping bag, and he would force Loughran out of this apartment at gunpoint, with Gretzler following behind. The pair then drive this young man up to the Superstition Mountains. Steelman then orders Loughran to climb inside this sleeping bag, and Loughran obeys because he's got a freaking shotgun at his head. And then Steelman pulls the trigger. He murders this 18-year-old boy for absolutely nothing. When they go back to the apartment, Robbins and Kathleen, they ask no questions. So then we come to October the 24th, and Steelman, he convinces Gretzler that they should murder Robert Robbins. He said he was really worried because he believed that Robbins had suspected the both of them in Unrein and Adshade's disappearance. After sundown, Gretzler, he would then strangle Robbins with electrical cord. He would then be shot in the head off Steelman just to make sure he was actually dead. And then they hid his body under the mattress in that apartment. Hours later, Kathleen's home, and she is conducting a seance. She was very much into all of that stuff, like the white magic, all of that. She's sitting, she's kneeling. Well, is she sitting or is she kneeling, Anna? Who knows? So she's kneeling down, she's conducting this seance, and Steelman walks up to her and shoots her in the head. Both of their bodies would be found on October the 28th. Friends and neighbours, they very quickly notice that these disappearances have taken place and they've tipped off the police. So they had witness interviews and then also Polaroid camera crime scene photos. They were able to piece together the suspects. So they have Bill, which is Willie Steelman, and then Doug, which is Douglas Gretzler. Now, Marsha Renslow, she would be interviewed and she went into detail about the carjackings, the armed robberies, forged motel payments, and she quite happily gives up their identities. And within just a few days, warrants would be issued for their arrest. But horrifyingly, by this point, Steelman and Gretzler, they're already on the move. They are not staying in one place too long. They know it's too risky. So hours after Kathleen's murder, they head for Tucson. On their way there, they decide to abandon Robert Robbins's Chevrolet and they decide they're going to hop on a bus with money they've stolen from him. So then on November the 1st, they are obviously travelling around trying to find the next place to go, and they set their sights on a Dodge Charger. Now, this has been driven by a 19-year-old man, Gilbert Rodriguez Sierra. But these men, they think they're so entitled to every single thing that they want. They want that Dodge Charger. They're going to take it. At gunpoint, they have Gilbert Sierra. They force him into the trunk of his own vehicle. They then drag him to a canyon near Gates Pass, and the terror this young boy must have went through, because they fire at him multiple times, but there's like 3 misfires, and then suddenly he's shot in the back and he's shot in the face. And whilst he is being shot and killed, Gretzler is laughing, bellowing, calling this 19-year-old a pig and a narc and that he deserves to die for simply driving a car that they wanted. Honestly, these scumbags make me so angry. So they return to Tucson and they're able to score amphetamines, and they would spend the night at a drug den, having the time of their lives. Gilbert Sierra's body would be discovered 12 hours later, and at this point Steelman and Gretzler, they're still driving around in his Dodge Charger. So the following day they wipe all their fingerprints off the vehicle and then they abandon it in a parking lot. And then we come to November the 3rd. Another victim. This was Vincent Armstrong, and he was another young man simply offering these 2 people a lift. Very quickly, however, this was turned into a hostage situation by Steelman. He would press a gun into this young man's torso, ordering him to act normal, act like nothing's going on, and just continue driving. But I mean, the young man literally has a freaking gun pointed at him. I don't think he can act natural. So obviously he starts to panic. Steelman then starts to panic, punches the young man, makes him pull over, and then he jumps into the driver's seat. Moments after they take off again, Vincent Armstrong, he sees possibly the only opportunity he's going to have to escape, and he throws himself out of this moving vehicle. He barely escapes with his life, but thankfully he did, because he was able to help the police draw up the identikits, which would of course help catch these men. And then we come to Michael and Patricia Sandberg. Now, Michael, he was a former Marine and Patricia was his wife. Steelman and Gretzler, they seen the perfect opportunity to take this couple hostage. Now, Patricia, she was distraught. She couldn't calm down. She was panicking so much, and Michael, he requests that the men at least give her a Valium to help with her nerves. Surprisingly, they allow this. Patricia, she then goes into the kitchen and she prepares sandwiches for these monsters. After they eat these, Gretzler and Steelman, they suddenly decide that it's time for a 60-minute makeover and they want to change up their appearance. So Gretzler, he dyes his blonde hair brown. Steelman shaves off his moustache and decides to try and conceal a black eye that he had earlier received using Patricia's makeup. I'm sorry, unless you know how to colour correct, you're not covering up a black eye. The husband, Michael, he was then forced to lay face down on the couple's bed. He was restrained in a way that meant if he moved, he would choke himself. Patricia was dragged from the bathroom onto the couch where she would be further bound. Gretzler then walked back into the bedroom, approached Michael and shot him directly in the head, whilst his wife has to listen. He then walks back through to the sofa where Patricia is lying, who is distraught, crying, can barely breathe, he takes a cushion and puts it over Patricia's head. He shot Patricia in the head, but this wasn't enough, so he decides to shoot her another 4 times. But Steelman, he believes somehow that Patricia's still alive, and he decides what needs to happen is her head needs to be bludgeoned in with a golf club. Complete overkill. After this poor couple have been murdered, they then loot the family home before taking off in Michael and Patricia's Datsun. They then checked into a motel using forged checks and continued heading toward California. And honestly, you would think they were done. Like, are these guys no tired? No, apparently not. On November the 6th, the pair, they would return to Steelman's hometown of Lodi, where they would orchestrate a robbery of United Market. After this is when they would then move on to the Parkin Errol Lang massacre. Now, by the time they arrive at the Parkinses' home, the couple, they aren't in. However, their 9-year-old child Robert and his 11-year-old sibling Lisa, they were being babysat by 18-year-old Deborah Errol and her 15-year-old brother Richard Jr. So, Steelman and Gretzler, they enter this property, okay, and then they go to the door. Deborah tells them that the owners of the home aren't in and that she's babysitting. Now, Steelman and Gretzler, they say to Deborah, you know, that's a problem, because the owner of this house, Walter, he owes us money. But this was a ruse to try and have Deborah lower her guard, and as soon as she did, they would barge by her, storm into the house and hold them at gunpoint. At this point, the young children are absolutely terrified, and so is Deborah, but she needs to protect them. She needs to protect her younger brother Richard. Deborah is comforting these children. She tells Gretzler and Steelman, listen, the couple's not home and they're not going to be home for hours, just leave and come back another day. But instead of leaving these teenagers and these young children alone, these sickos force them through to the living room and force them to sit on the sofa with them. Deborah, at one point, she's then able to call her father. She is completely distressed, she is terrified, she explains what's going on, and immediately he rushes over to the Parkinses' home. Now, he had actually told his wife Wanda, if I'm not back in 15 minutes, you need to call the police because that means that something really bad is going on. Gretzler and Steelman, they learn this from him because he threatens them with that. He says, you know, my wife's going to call the police when I'm not home in 15 minutes, and they use this against him. They would force him to go home and retrieve his wife and bring her back. Of course, one of them accompanies him because otherwise he would just go straight to the police. At 9:25 p.m, Mark Lang, who is Deborah Errol's fiancé, he arrives at the property. Now, he came because he was meant to be driving Deborah and Richard Jr. home, only to be met by this unimaginable horror and for him himself to be taken hostage. Then at 10:45 p.m, Joanne Parkin and Walter Parkin, they return home, or they returned to hell. The pair of them, they were forced to hand over any possessions that they had on them. Joanne had pleaded with Gretzler and Steelman to just allow her to put her children to bed. And weirdly enough, they allowed this. So Joanne, she goes upstairs, she puts her children to bed in the master bedroom, and she begs them, please just go to sleep. Everything's fine. Everything's going to be okay. Just please try rest and try and get some sleep. All hostages, they would be ordered to go into the bathroom, into the walk-in closet. All of them except Walter Parkin. Walter would be forced to drive to United Market and retrieve money from the floor safe with Steelman. Now, they were able to get $4,000, which in 2025, this would be $28,400. And then he's forced to return back to this house of horror. Once they are back in this home, Gretzler immediately makes his way to the master bedroom where both the 9-year-old and 11-year-old child were asleep, and he would shoot them both to death. They then make their way over to the closet where all of these hostages are being held. As you can imagine, Joanne, she is just devastated, she is distraught, she knows what's happened to her children. Everyone in this closet is begging and pleading for their lives, but that didn't matter. This was going to happen. Steelman and Gretzler, this is what they wanted. Deborah Errol's father, Richard Errol Sr., he would be the first one to be shot. It would then be Walter Parkin, followed by Richard Errol Jr. Then her mother Wanda would be shot and killed. Then Deborah herself, and then finally Joanne Parkin. And there was not a single element of remorse from these monsters. Do you know what they did? They went downstairs and they consumed a chocolate birthday cake in the family's wine. Like, this family just a day or two ago have been celebrating a birthday. And now they're all dead. Then when they're finished the chocolate cake, once they've stuffed their evil faces, they decide, let's get any other last valuables and we'll leave. So they left the home around 1:20 a.m. and around an hour later they would check into a Holiday Inn under the alias of W.J. Symes. And then around 3 a.m. that night, or I should probably say that morning, an 18-year-old house guest at the Parkin home, 18-year-old Carol Jenkins, she returns home from an evening out. Now she goes into the house and she does notice that there's a couple of lights on, which is a bit weird, but she doesn't go and investigate, she just heads straight to bed. 4 hours later, Mark Lang, Deborah Errol's fiance, his friends are panicking because he was meant to come back and meet them, and he hasn't. So they're panicking because this is really weird. Usually he would alert them if he's not coming back. They're walking down the street and they see his car parked outside the Parkin home. And honestly, more power to them. They go to this door at 7:03 a.m. They would then be greeted with a very groggy, disorientated Carol Jenkins. Carol says that doesn't sound right, like Mark would have went away with Deborah and Richard Jr., but she'll go check with the Parkins, who were still asleep. But as we know, this family were not asleep. They were dead. When first responders arrive, they would be greeted by two very distraught men trying to look after this young woman who was equally as distraught. She was screaming and she was flailing around the house like a human alarm bell. But inside, the scene would be even worse. It was so grim, so gruesome and so horrifying. The two Parkin children, they were laying dead in the master bedroom. And this horror would only escalate when the officers, they made their way through to the bathroom, to the walk-in closet, where they found 7 victims all crammed into this closet. Now the investigation at this point kicks into overdrive. Everyone wants to speak to everyone. Witnesses from a motel where the killers had stayed, they give descriptions, and then a cream Datsun with Arizona plates. This led investigators straight to the apartment complex of Michael Sandberg. Within hours, the arrest warrants for Gretzler and Steelman, they would be updated in connection with the murder of Kathleen and Robert. They had their bail set at $222,000, but like, should bail even be an option? I mean, I know these losers can't afford it, but still, you never know who they might know. News of 9 fresh homicides within the San Joaquin County, this sped through the law enforcement grapevine, linking the Phoenix killings to Lodi, Steelman's hometown. By November the 7th, the San Joaquin County Sheriff, they go public. They're not pulling any punches. They publicly name Willie Steelman as a prime suspect in the Victor murders, and they also hint that he is a prime suspect behind the Phoenix killings. And at this point, the net starts closing in pretty fast. A tip had confirmed that the pair had been in Lodi just before the Orchard Road murders. Convenient? I think not. And then Donald Scott, who had spent some time with them, he spills the beans about the Victor supermarket robbery that they had been planning. And by the morning of November the 8th, their names, their mugshots, splattered everywhere. All across Sacramento Union, Sacramento B, they really stood no chance. Meanwhile, at this point, the dynamic duo, they are laying low in Sacramento. They had checked into the Clooney Hotel under aliases and they thought they were safe. Now, Steelman, he checked in as Will Simon, and Gretzler, he just checked in as himself. And they were about to get a very rude awakening because when they bought the newspaper, Willie Steelman's own mugshot staring right back at him. 11 homicides now had this loser's name written all over them. Naturally, at this point, he freaks out and he decides, maybe Florida's going to be a better bet for us. And honestly, this is just, it's hilarious how stupid these criminals are, because Steelman, he tries to recruit a young woman to drive them out of town. However, a hotel clerk very quickly spots them and they tip off the police. Within minutes, armed officers, they swarm this hotel. Gretzler, ever the dramatic one, he tries his best to escape to the 4th floor, but very quickly realises doesn't stand a chance. So instead, he surrenders on the 2nd floor. And what he says? Comical. His arms were raised at exactly 10:04 a.m. and he says, "Man, I'm glad this is over. I've seen enough killing and man, I don't want to see any more." Okay. Alrighty then.
Alrighty then.
And I mean, if you think Gretzler's like dramatic, like trying to run away and stuff like that, Steelman, turns it into a full-fledged production. He refuses to go quietly. He is screaming and shouting, "This is a mistaken identity! I'm going to commit suicide!" He demanded the media come for this. He wanted it all on camera. And he only surrendered when a live radio announcement assured him, "You're not going to get shot." Because of course these losers, they kill other people but they're so terrified of death themselves. So once he finally emerges, immediately he's handcuffed and then he makes an announcement himself. He cheerfully says, "Well, I guess I'm going back to Stockton." Like, what? When I tell you the aftermath of these murders, once they had caught these criminals, it was like a candy store for the forensics. Like, they just had their pick of the lot. I mean, number one, Sandberg's keyring and keys was on Gretzler's keyring. Their hotel room yielded revolver cartridges, a Smith & Wesson that was used in multiple murders, stolen checkbooks, ID cards, and every other piece of evidence imaginable that connected them to all the crimes. Now, the Sandbergs' vehicle, the vehicle that they had, this had revealed blood-stained boots and jeans, there was jewellery, there was a brown grocery sack that was stuffed with wallets that did not belong to them, purses, credit cards, all looted from the Parkin household. Now, Steelman and Gretzler immediately, they were separated under an armed guard. Both of them were whisked off into solitary confinement, forbidden from talking to each other. Steelman, true to form, refuses to cooperate. He's not going to talk until his lawyer's there. And even when his lawyer arrived, still refused to cooperate. Now Gretzler, he starts off playing the obedient student. I was just doing what I was told. My life was at risk. Same old chestnut with these people. But gradually, the truth would seep out and he would reveal that he was in fact a very active and willing participant in these murders. So the trials begin in California for the Orchard Road murders. Gretzler, he would plead guilty to 9 counts of first-degree murder, whereas Steelman, he pleaded no contest to avoid the kidnapping charges. Now, Judge Pappas, he was having none of this. He could not be doing with the BS. He had said that Steelman was the architect and engineer of the murders, and Gretzler was a willing participant. So life sentences would follow and the pair were extradited to Arizona for the Sandberg and Sierra murders. And let me tell you, Arizona, full-blown theatre production. Now Steelman, his defence, they leaned heavy on the insanity. They said that he was a tortured, misunderstood man, a victim of drugs, rage and hallucinations. Now apparently he felt like he was fighting social injustice. He claimed extreme headaches, really bad acid trips, and also a vendetta against the ruling class. That was an excuse for that was a defence for his murders. Now the prosecution, they're like, let's just cut this dead in the water. They enter the witnesses, the evidence, the blood-stained evidence, bullets, concrete proof that his claims of moral justification and insanity and psychotic episodes were complete, utter nonsense. And thankfully, the jury, they wouldn't buy it either. He would be convicted of the 2 murders, the kidnappings, the robberies, and he would be sentenced to death, plus decades more for the Sandberg murders. Now, Gretzler's trial, it would follow a similar arc. His defence was trying to minimise his role in the murders, that he was an unwilling participant, and they had classed him as a secondary character who was dragged into Steelman's production. Are we in Scream? What's all the film references? But thankfully the prosecution dismantled every single claim. The evidence, witness testimony, the blood-stained evidence, the bullets, the fingerprints, the whole 9 yards. They had tried to claim that he was a passive observer and that he was actually a decent person before he met Willie Steelman. We all know that's not true. The jury would then deliberate for over 2 hours trying to work out what this POS deserves. He was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, robbery and kidnapping, and he too would be sentenced to death. Hallelujah. Now, I will say, Life on Death Row really highlighted the contrast between the pair. Steelman was an absolute nuisance, a headache to everyone in that prison. He was manipulative, he was constantly spinning stories about his terrible upbringing. He said he was innocent or that there was moral justification. He was also conning his correspondents to send in money and gifts to him in prison. He would feud with guards, he terrorised fellow inmates. But he did keep cordial relations with Gretzler. Now, on August the 7th of 1986, good news would echo through the walls of that prison because Steelman, he had collapsed and died in his cell. Whilst it's good news that this monster was wiped off the earth, it was devastating news for some of the families, and in particular, Patricia Sandberg's father. He was absolutely devastated that justice had been cheated due to natural causes. This monster deserves so much worse, and his daughter deserves so much better. Now, Gretzler, on the other hand, by contrast, he transformed into the model prisoner. He completely severed ties with Steelman. He reconnected with his family, or, at least the ones that would still talk to him. He even wrote apology letters to victims' families. He had expressed remorse, and he acknowledged the justice in his death sentence. By 1998, he had completely stopped fighting his execution. He accepted that it was going to happen. And on June the 3rd of 1998, Douglas Gretzler, he would become the first person to be executed during daylight hours in Arizona. I didn't know they only executed at night, or middle of the night. Now, his last meal, he had 6 fried eggs, 4 slices of bacon, 2 slices of toast, coffee, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. When he went to be executed, he wore his glasses so he could see his family members. He also publicly expressed his remorse to all 17 victims and their families. He then turned to his sister and he expressed love for her and for her children, and quietly mouthed, "I love you," and bye, right as the lethal injection began. Now, at that moment in time, he was actually Arizona's longest serving death row inmate, closing the chapter finally on a spree that destroyed 17 lives and the rest. Because it didn't just destroy 17 lives, it destroyed entire families. This video today is of course dedicated to the victims' families. I am sending thoughts, love and prayer your way. I can't even imagine the horror that you suffered through. And for the victims, I really hope wherever they are now that they are resting peacefully, and there is no conviction, there's no punishment that could possibly equalise the loss of a loved one. And for that, I am so sorry. But my loves, that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. I really hope you found this one interesting. Maybe, just maybe, it was a new one to some of you. If it was, let me know down below. And if you've got this far, do you get brown hearts? Either leave a brown heart or a pumpkin. Yeah, leave a brown heart or a pumpkin if you got this far. Before you go, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hype up this video. I really need all the hype points I can possibly get. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they will all be listed down below. Your case suggestions can be left in the comments, or you can send them over to me on Instagram or via email. Everything is all linked in description, alongside any product details of what I've used on my face today, just in case you're wondering. But that is it for today. Please, please, please remember, be a good person, do not be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!